Okay, and so hello everyone. This is Noah Lenstra speaking to you from the School of Education in the Department of Library and Information Studies, and I'm really pleased to have with us here today Mathiasson. All right, pronunciation. Passable for an American. And she is a PhD student in the Department of Information Studies at the University of Copenhagen. And the next time we see her, she's going to be Dr. Mathiasson.
Hopefully everything turns out well.
And so she's going to be talking with us today about conceptualizing public library programs based on the work that she has been doing in Denmark. So Mia, go ahead and you can introduce yourself and take it away.
Yeah, I will try to take it away. It's planned to be around 40 minutes of me talking, and then we have some time for questions and comments afterwards, which I would look forward to. So yes, my name is Mathiasson, and my working title for the PhD project right now is Conceptualizing Public Library Programs, History, Development, and Terminology. And I'm from the Department of Information Studies at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. So just briefly about the agenda for this presentation. First, a little bit about myself, but most about the PhD project, the affiliations, the context, and the project itself. Then I'm going to introduce in more details, in some more details the overall study, but focus on two research articles which I have already almost conducted. One of them is submitted and accepted, and one of them is almost finished. And then leave time for some discussions afterwards. But first of all, I put it in here to say thank you to the department for taking such good care of me and welcoming me in such a nice way. Especially thanks to Noah, of course, for making it possible, and to Lisa for welcoming me as well and making me part of the department. I really feel like I've been part, even though it's only been for 1.5 months now. And thank you so much to my colleagues at the office for making me feel at home as well. Yeah, thank you. Also, thanks for giving me this opportunity to present the work, and I will be so happy to just share ideas afterwards and also during. If you have any questions, please just interrupt me, and also if I speak too Danish, I would like to hear it. Okay, so briefly about me. I have a background in art history with a master and a bachelor degree from University of Copenhagen, and that's why it's a little funny to be studying public libraries right now, but I'm actually part of this research project focusing on archives, libraries, and museums, digitization, and the public sphere, and it's a part of a research project called ALMPUB. And I went into this with a big interest in cultural institutions in general. I focused specifically on museums in my graduate degree, and that's why it didn't seem so weird to focus on this part of cultural institutions. The initial problem statement of the PhD that I applied for was focusing specifically on Danish public libraries, and then I decided to focus on these cultural activities, later known as programs, as I've developed, and with a specific emphasis on the social and cultural role and function of these institutions in a digital age. That was sort of a very broad problem statement initially made by the research project. So currently I have been narrowing that down and focusing specifically on public library programs. Of course, focusing on cultural and social role, but choosing to have these sort of stepping stones in history, development, and terminology, which I'll explain later. I started out in February 2017, and I'm going to finish in February 2020, unless, I'm going to postpone it a little bit. Half a year almost. Yes, I'm affiliated with the ALMPUB research project. Very briefly about this project, since it's actually what made me come here in the first place, since Noah is also affiliated with that project. It originates in Norway, in a Norwegian research context that has been very much focused on specifically public libraries as arenas for citizenship and for public debate, and it sort of developed out of a new constitution and a new Norwegian act for public libraries, where they got this function this obligated function to be arenas for public debate, which also fostered to some extent more focus on programs. And then it's been going on since 2014. The ALMPUB project, which I am a part of, it's a part of a bigger project that's actually going on since 2014. But yes, and there's 8 countries affiliated: Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Germany, Switzerland, Hungary, and the US. And you can read more on this website. So briefly about. Oh yeah, I'm just doing this. Is it okay?
No, I'm doing it.
Yeah, that's
fine. I can follow. No, you're fine.
Okay, sorry. Briefly about the context. I thought we should just talk a little bit about Denmark, where it is and what it is, before talking about their libraries and more specifically my project. So Denmark is a rather small country located between Germany and Sweden and Norway. It's part of Scandinavia, and it's also connected to Faroe Islands and Greenland to some extent, even though, that's a long story. The government form is cultural monarchy, the capital is Copenhagen, and we have about 5.5 million people in Denmark. And now you can show the little clip just to give you some pictures.
Okay, and Barb, this will probably not work. I'm going to put the link here, so Barb, you can click on this link to watch on your computer. We're going to watch it here in the room, but it may not come through.
Just the first 1 minute or
okay.
half a minute.
Denmark seems to have cemented its position near the top of nearly every global quality of life survey. Take a look around this country, and it's not hard to see why. Denmark is a country where the term fairy tale can be used freely, from the literary legacy of Hans Christian Andersen to its fine old castles. In a nutshell, Denmark gets it right. A place of old-fashioned charm, forward-looking design and progressive values. It's no surprise this country regularly tops the charts as the happiest nation on earth.
That's actually right. Okay, then just so I'm actually, if you go back, I'm actually originally from a city here in the west coast of Denmark, and it's actually the happiest city in the world, or in Europe, I think. And then, if Denmark is the happiest country in the world, then I'm actually from the most happiest city, so that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So that was just a little bit about the context. Focusing on the public libraries in Denmark, every municipality is obligated by law to have a public library, which I guess is sort of distinct from the laws in the US. This means also that there's as many public library systems as there's municipalities, and that the library systems are sort of funded by the municipalities, but through the from the state originally, of course, from the taxpayers originally. And we have a current act on public libraries which has been not that much revised since the act in 1964, which is actually why I'm going back to 1964 in my project. But the one we have now is from 2000, and it includes among other things the internet and multimedia, focusing on information, education, and cultural activity as the main sort of obligations of the public library. Which are free of use for all people in Denmark, and you can just use it wherever you are. You don't have to belong to a specific municipality. I think that's also a little distinct. The funny thing is, or the interesting thing is, when I got into this, is that programs are actually not necessarily free, and this is sort of a little twist in the library laws, saying that core services are free. Should be free, but special services can be charged, and that's up to the municipalities if they want to charge. So it turns out, since programs are actually sometimes charged, they are special services apparently, whatever that means. So that's sort of the background also for being interested in this sort of act, the constitution law constitution. Yeah. Then there's not that much reported on public libraries, specifically not their programs, but we have this annual national assessment report published by the Danish Agency of Cultural and Palaces, and they published this report since 2009, which includes some information about programs, but it's very limited. And it should be said that we now have current debates about a new or revised version of the Library Act, which is a very interesting moment, of course, also to look in this, because maybe these programs, they also should be part of the core services. And maybe there's this big influence from Norway, of course, so maybe we should have a similar sort of statement in our act obligating the library to be this physical place for meetings and discussions as well. That's debated. So, what is a public library program? As you said, Noah, maybe we should have an open debate about it. I don't know if anyone has maybe some of you can help me find out. What do you think, Noah?
Oh, what do I think? I mean, I think that, so just, I mean, in the U.S., and Mia and I have been talking, so the past decade, actually, the American Library Association's public programs office has actually been trying to figure out what is a public library program, because and they've gotten multiple grants from the Institute of Museum and Library Services to try to figure it out, but it's not entirely clear. I mean, it's everything from, I mean, essentially what they're saying now is that it's some sort of event or gathering that involves people voluntarily coming, and in some way ties to the library's overall mission, but that's about as as specific as they get.
I guess everybody has, that's also what they say in the ALP funded, the ALA funded project, that everyone has this idea of what a program is, but it's a hard time when they come together and try to find a solution or a definition they can agree on. And that made me, as an art historian, think, of course, that it's very similar to the discussion of what is art.
Yeah.
Because everything is art if it's in an art museum, or if it's recognized by a gallery, or if it's made by an artist. But finding this like holistic sort of approach, what is art, is probably not possible. So you could ask why pose this question in the first place, since it seems like this is very much related to that. And I think the discussion of what is a public library program and the discussion of what is art is in itself sort of worth having, since it fosters new ideas and new arguments and reflections on this field. So that's what I'll try to do. And I really like this illustration from it's from a 1975 report in England on their public library cultural activities. That's also the thing. Yeah, we will continue with that. Yeah. So one of the things about the term program is that it's so confusing, because it has been used. There has been used a lot of different words to sort of describe this, and I will also go into details with this. But of course, I needed to land on a working definition to actually investigate this. For me, public library programs right now are publicly announced activities and events taking place within or in relation to a public library. It's very broad, and that's intentional, since I want this really broad umbrella to be able to not make any distinction based on, for instance, the relationship to the cultural department or to the educational department or wherever they were normally sort of decided upon. So the overall research aim behind this thesis is to establish this empirically based conceptualization of public library programs, of course from a Danish perspective, but it is including a lot of international examples, and I will also tell you why that is. But I also, part of this project is also to develop analytical and theoretical tools for future research, assessment, and debates about public library programs as part of public libraries and its services. Yes, so I have some overall research questions, and then I have some more specific empirical research questions that are going to, that I'll talk to you about later, but the overall research questions, which are intended to be answered by the thesis as sort of a unified whole, is because my thesis is based on articles and text. So it's a sort of article-based, we call it. It's not a monograph, which is why I have these smaller projects, and then I try to sort of make a unified whole of it, which is a little frustrating. So very big questions are like, what is a public library program, and how can we understand this phenomena in a current context? What characterizes the historical development of library programs and the related terminologies used to describe and portray them, and how can we conceptualize public library programs as public library services today? That's sort of the overall question, actually. Then I have worked with smaller and more specific research questions, which are answered in the research articles that I'm working on and writing currently. So how can we research public library programs which have already taken place? Which programs have been taking place in relation to Danish public libraries since the 60s, and what characterizes the development of these programs, and how can we analyze and define public library programs as public library services in terms of form and content and function. And I'll get into these research questions later, but these are, as you can see, more specific, even though they're still big, and they are sort of empirically answerable in some sense. Okay, so I really tried to narrow down the text on the slides, but this is one of the first ones, I think. So the background is also to understand this very sort of confusing terminology that has been used, and that's why I included the phrase terminology in the three sort of stepping stones. Public library programs has, in the sense that I understand it, and the broad definition have been described and portrayed historically as extension activities, extension work, library extension, extra library activity, publicity, outreach to some extent, educational activities, cultural programs, public programs, and just programs. And I just landed on programs as one of the, maybe not the best, but the most current term used, especially in the US, which is the reason I'm also here is that the US has this really long history of writing about these kind of activities, and for me, I think it's necessary when you do a study on such a specific topic that you look out from your own, especially if you have a small country like me, and look to a broader international context, because we don't have that much research and knowledge about this, so we need to include broader spectrum. But I also think doing the investigation of these kind of terminologies is really important, and would in the thesis be some kind of extended literature review, some kind of basis upon which to have a discussion, because of course the traditions from both publicity and outreach and education and culture are still found within these many different types of programs, and a sort of drawing on these traditions. Anyways, when doing this review, I discovered four things. First of all, I discovered that this dichotomy between experience-based writings and research-based writings, and that there is an over-representation of experience-based writings on this topic, which are highly descriptive, and that's actually both historical and currently literature. And there's a very few research-based writings that looks at public library programs as this unified whole. There's a lot, of course, and Dr. Lenstra is one of the ones who really publish on programs, specific types of programs. But in this research project, I tried to look at it in a more sort of, maybe another perspective, a broader perspective. And there it's really hard to find actually research-based writings that are current. So a few writings exist, and some of them are predominantly, they are older date. Here I refer to some by Stone and Smith and Heim, and these are all American writings. And then we have like one real study conducted in the late 1980s in Denmark by Bruno Kjær and Anders Ørum, and that's the only study I've been able to find, and it's specifically focused on 1 year in 1989, and it's based on surveys to all public libraries in Denmark, but half of them didn't reply. So it's this very sort of limited, but still, of course, very valuable study. And since then, no study has really been conducted on this. Yeah, so this is what I find. I find that this dichotomy between experience-based and research-based, and that there's a significant gap in research-based literature in general, and especially in Denmark, as I also argue. Then I find that one of the most dominating ways of approaching programs in both research-based and experience-based writings is actually the listing model, which I termed it. It's what is a program? It is concert, it is film showings, it is, excursions, it is trips to it's yoga classes, it's everything. But it's just a listing of different types of programs without, often without any sort of description about the format of these programs or how they relate to each other or why they're there, and yeah, very little information about the format and content and function in general. And then I find that understandings and definitions and descriptions or portrayal of these activities are very closely connected to and depending on the understandings, definitions, and description of public libraries and their services, which is probably not that strange, but it's really interesting actually to go through old literature on this and find out how much the understanding reflects the view of the library at the time. And that's also part of the historical chapter in my thesis I have discussed. So it's so nice. Okay, so the research, I discovered that there's this need to address the phenomena in its own right and as a broad phenomena. But in order to do so, I needed to develop a research method for doing so. And I found that the explorative research approach would be a very good way to start. Narrowed it down to the need for a theory-generating explorative approach to actually establish these analytical and theoretical tools that I needed. And then I landed on grounded theory. So that's this very nice quote that one does not begin with a theory, then prove it. Rather, one begins with an area of study, and what is relevant to that area is allowed to emerge. I know grounded theory has been heavily debated, and I won't go into that discussion right now. But I think what I really tried to do in this all this process, and it's been more than 2 years now, is actually to allow what is relevant to emerge. And that's also why I found that there was all of these writings, for instance, that I wouldn't have found if I just started out by saying education or culture, but actually allowing this variety of the different sources. And you'll also see that when I go into my data, that it's really sort of diverse. And then of course there is, we can talk about it. Okay, so my vision of grounded theory, and of course there's different schools.
Let's go ahead and skip this if you don't mind.
Do you want me to skip it?
Yeah, we can go into the findings if that's
oh, okay. I'm already talking to them.
No, that's fine. Just,
Okay, so very briefly, it's about working inductively and deductively. That means like finding something, analyzing it, maybe develop a theory about it, but then go back and test it and continues to find it and working in circles in this sense. Okay, so shortly presentation of the data. I'm focusing on data in two different from two different sources. One of them is from two physical public libraries chosen because they had old data on programs. One of them has these monthly reports since the late 1950s, and one of them has scrapbooks. Sorry, one of them has they're in Danish, so I didn't do it so interesting to read it. But you can go to the next. So one of the other library has scrapbooks, very sort of neatly organized since the 1970s, and these include like newspaper cuttings stating programs or activities in the library, announcing them in some sense. Yes. Then both of the libraries have flyers and calendars, sort of documenting their practices, working with programs, but they only begin to make these flyers in the early 80s, and the other one actually in the early 90s. So I cannot just go back and find all what has been made so neatly, but I really think that it's a study in itself to just look at the way they use these sort of very basic ways to make their own flyers and make them look. This is really pretty, I think. Okay, and then we go. Yes, and then the latest data that I have, and that's the other part of the study, is Facebook events. Because a lot of Danish public libraries, as I said, oh, I didn't say that, but a lot of Danish public libraries use Facebook. I'll go into details with this later, but these are sort of, in a sense, an extension of what we already saw in the programs and the flyers. Yeah. Okay, so very small. Let's skip that. That's the structure of the thesis. So as I said, there's 3 research articles, and I will focus on the 2 of them that I have already written. One, yeah, I will go into details with the first 2. The last one is actually a chapter for research anthology published as a part of the research project, and it's going to look at all this historical data that I just talked to you about, showed you, and it's going to also include interviews with the 5 librarians working in these institutions, and all of them have worked with public library programming since, for at least, I think, 4 of them at least 30 years, and then one 13 years. So, but they all have sort of long experiences with this. Yes. Okay, so the first research article that I have submitted and actually got accepted is called "Researching Public Library Programs Through Facebook Events: A New Research Approach," and it is part of this aim to establish a way to actually research this empirically, looking at programs which has already taken place, even though this is in a sort of close history, a recent history. So yeah, the aim is to develop and test this approach. And the ultimate research question is whether the combination of Facebook events as data, grounded theory as a research strategy, and web archiving as methods or tools for data collection makes for a valuable research approach. So it's very much inspired by grounded theory, the whole process. You can skip to the next. There's this data selection part in close relation to the data analysis and the theory development. Exemplified by the writing of memos and reflections and the making of diagrams along the way, so they sort of add to each other, or to build on each other. Okay. So I guess all of you in this room, and maybe also Bob, knows what a Facebook event look like. But it's still interesting to sort of break it down into these building blocks and ask, like, what is actually found when collecting these data. And what I found is that they actually provide rich sources of data for a grounded theory study, looking at textual data, because they have both these very sort of formal information about title, organizer, time and place, but they also have these descriptive texts found in the event descriptions, which Facebook event descriptions, that sort of opens up for more explorative research, encoding and categorizing what is found in these texts, and that's, I'll talk about that later. But collecting them was, it was important for me to both have the visual sort of layout, which is why I used screen capture methods, actually just using Snagit to mark this specific and save it, and I did that for more than 2,500 Facebook events from 12 different libraries. I'll go into that. and then there's this fantastic thing, and I don't know if it's there anymore because Facebook, of course, had some recent regulations, but I collected this data in the beginning of 2018, and back then there was this data harvesting via API, and it was actually called Facebook for Developers or something, and it was meant for an easy way to both upload data and get data, but of course only from public pages, and this is all public pages and public domains. So I used that method, and I think it saved me 2 months' work or something, because I thought I was going to actually copy-paste the text, and I used 2 days of doing this instead. Really nice. And they're all in Excel sheets, and it looks amazing. So let's just, Oh, but I hope that I answered why I was collecting this. Sorry, I collect this because I found that there's actually no such online available sort of repositories of what has been going on in libraries, and I asked a lot of libraries in the beginning of my study, very sort of naive. Hi, can I get like a list of all the programs you have done since, you know, X? I hoped it would be since the 60s, maybe since the 80s. We don't have such a list. We don't keep track, because it's only been sort of a part of the, that was why I told you about the annual reports. It's only been part of this report. You only had to report it since 2009, so nobody has saved it. And the lists that they have were often, because then I got some lists, and it was often like a title, maybe a day and a date, maybe a time, and then nothing more. So I couldn't actually use it for what I would like to, like what was the theme of the film screening, or what was the debate topic or something. So I found that these data actually provided it, and they were available, even though there's this ethical discussion if it's okay on Facebook and so on. I'm so happy that it was okay at the time, and all the libraries are informed about it and have said that it is okay also.
Is this the right one?
Yes, sorry, I need to do this. Okay, so before choosing finding these 2,793 Facebook events, I needed to sort of ask who should be some criteria for choosing this data. And as I said, all the municipalities have a library system. And often the library system of the municipality has their own Facebook page. So the municipalities became this way of sorting out and sampling the data. So I decided on 6 sampling criteria, which refers to size, in the sense that the size of the system varies. Some has maybe 7 libraries, some only have 2 or 3. Also, I made this sort of library budget per citizen distinction, so that, yeah, we can maybe just move on to the next one. Okay, so I ended up with 12 public library systems, and they represent these different criteria in size, budget, geographical location, municipality type, the year since Facebook was used the first time, and the number of event descriptions at the time of the data collection. And I would say that they sort of represent a broad variety of both places and locations. And what I meant with the budgets was that I divided it into geographical locations, and then I looked at budgets, and then I sort of chose that I needed to have run from above average, and below average from each of these locations. So that's very confusing. But let's move on. It resulted in these more than 2,500 events, and they are, of course, you could say that, of course, they are mostly represented from 2015 and onwards, because, of course, Facebook gets more and more sort of used, and actually it has been part of some municipalities' cultural policies that public libraries should in fact use Facebook, which is really sort of interesting now in these days. So that's why it's also been like motivated and urged, and that's why I think we find more use of it in the later years. So part of doing this rounded query study of this data was to experiment with the data visualization, and also I did a lot of text queries in the data to begin with to find out where to go and what to look at. And this, I know this needs some explanation. I don't know how much you can see because it's really.
Yeah, the color is washing out a little bit.
Close the light,
I think the lights are off. I think it went. Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
I'm not sure if there's.
Anyway, this pool of blurbs, circles, it represents all the different program, event descriptions, which represent different programs. Which so the small circles are only one program, and the bigger circles are maybe 2 or 3 programs, and then the really big circles are 35, I think, programs. And this is a division in the tableau on the title of program. And it just showed me very visually that comparing titles doesn't necessarily make it easier for you to understand what is going on, because not that many titles actually sort of compares. There's so many different ways to announce this. And mostly the titles that actually do compare are from the same library. So it's just because they have the series of something. Yeah, so I found that this was not the way to do it. Just wanted to show you that. Then I found also that by using grounded theory as this approach of continuously asking questions both to the data or sort of about the data and of the data, I got information on the content and the location of the libraries, the duration of the programs announced, etc. So I use these very basic questions sort of continuously throughout the process to keep on sort of narrowing down what is actually going on. In the beginning, it was like what is going on in the Facebook pages, and now it's like if we see them as a sort of a representation of programs which is actually taking place, we find these kinds of information. Yeah, and in the first part of this chapter, this article is focusing mainly on developing and testing this research approach. So the analysis and especially the theory development are sort of sensitive, and they are also in the article. I also state that I want to continue working with this data because it needs to be sort of more research has to be done and more analysis has to be done. But I do find some sort of key categories that I sort of continue to explore, and these are themes and topics, types of programs, of course, partners and collaboration, the role of the library professional, the role of the participants, location, and access. And just to explain how I worked with this, I tried to divide it into sort of the continuums of meaning. So, for instance, access has this spectrum of different going from, for instance, free entrance, open for all, and no skills and preparation needed, to free and entrance fees, limited access, and skills and preparation needed. And of course, a variety exists in between.
And I'd like to just, so this is actually something Mia and I were now hoping to do a comparative study of US and Danish public libraries, because the infrastructure around this access piece is so wildly different. Like in Denmark, it's actually illegal for libraries to engage in fundraising.
I don't know if it's illegal, but it's not seen.
It's not seen, whereas in the US, it's extremely common for public libraries to fund most, if not all, of their programs through Friends of the Libraries. And so it's just very, very different, the whole funding model and access structure for programs between Denmark and the US.
And for me, that was just a little part of this finding. And then I talked with Noah, and he was like, wait a minute, you have like entrance fees in what is that? So I actually didn't think it was so weird until I was so that's really nice to have this. And that was actually also why I found that the programs are not part of the core services, if you can say that. So thank you. Okay, so we can go to the findings. Yeah, okay, so very broadly, the findings were tentative around these categories, which should be explored further. Especially I found that there was this content level and format level present that needed exploration, but that the format level in some sense were more approachable, since, as I already also said, with the Facebook events, they all have this very sort of simple information on the exact location, the exact time. So these indicators of format are sort of more approachable than the content level, because that also depends on going in and actually sort of defining different topics and anyways. And then ultimately we conclude, because I wrote this article with my supervisor, we concluded that the combination is successful and it's very good. Okay. Yes, the second article is building upon this first one in the data collected, and also some of the tentative findings are sort of extended or tested again. We call it between collections and connections, referring to this very used phrase, especially in the Scandinavian countries. I don't know if it's also used here, from collection to connection, describing the development of public libraries as this, from a collection center to a user-centered perspective. And I will go into details what we mean between collections afterwards, but the aim is to analyze public library programs in terms of their format, content, and function, as we found was possible in the data in the first article, and to develop an empirical-based and textually grounded analytical model for doing so. So that is the research questions, very basically addressing the format, the content, and how we can understand and analyze the function. Because the function is, of course, the most speculative in these three empirically based questions. It is, of course, depending on analytical or interpretation, and of course, content is also, but I will explain it later, that function is more analytical and more sort of interpretive than the others. So I basically use format, content, and function as these like three levels of abstraction looking at programs. They're not meant to be mutually exclusive. Instead, they build on each other, of course. So format is the basic elements behind the programs, the building blocks, as we talked about, not only the structural building blocks of the Facebook events, but actually what makes a program physically possible in time and place. Content is this complex of parts. I will get into that. And the function is a practical purpose outcome. So function is seen, in my view, as opposed to role, for instance, which is more like ideologically funded in some way. And here we look at what is intended, the practical intention. Yes. So the data analysis, I will not go into details because we always talk a little bit about grounded theory, but focusing again on coding and analyzing and understanding based on the initial understandings made beforehand, and then using samples to sort of test the findings, and in the end test the findings from the samples on the extensive body of data. So cross-testing in some sense. The format is answered by asking the questions who, where, when, and how. Again, trying to be very sort of simple about it, and then going into details as we go on. I needed to go back.
Oh, go back.
Yeah, just one. There was one thing that I wanted to say, because I think it makes more sense if I introduce that one of the parts of my especially open and initial coding, inspired by Copenhagen is that you divide the data into categories, properties, and dimensional locations. And categories are, of course, higher level concepts. Properties are sort of the words used to describe these concepts or categories, and dimensional locations are sort of the range or the continuum on which they can be located. So that's the idea behind the analysis, I think. Yes. So the question of who soon turned out to be like both by whom and for whom, since there's this sender-receiver relationship in some sense. So the first category is by whom, that's the organizers. Doesn't have to be a librarian, spoiler alert, but it's the person or persons or group in charge of planning, organizing, conducting, or facilitating the program. They are often actually mentioned specifically in the descriptive text. Properties are the role of the librarian or the library professional, and it signals if some sort of partnership or collaboration between external partners has been taking place. And the dimensional location can be located on a continuum from the librarian or the library professionals as acting as host in charge of the whole thing, or to programs almost entirely planned, organized, and conducted by others, and that's mostly in Denmark volunteers if somebody else takes complete over. But we stress almost, I think. Okay, we haven't. Okay, but I stress almost. That should have been almost, since the library is in some sense involved, but we will return to that. For whom is, of course, the receiver of the program, the intended participants. The properties of this group is difficult in the sense that it's very speculative also when you go from something as concrete as target or age group, which is very often mentioned in the descriptive text, and then you add to that shared community of interest, which is also defining for intended audiences. And that's why I think we argue that it complicates the definition based on age and target groups alone, and really adds to the complexity of this phenomenon, because the intended participants can be from a variety of different target groups, but can have the same interest in classical music, for instance. Yeah, we shouldn't go into that. But if you only look at age and target groups, the dimension allocations are actually really broad, and it's from babies until only 3 months old until seniors. And I think specifically I got also 99 years mentioned. It's a little age discriminating, there's not 110 of them.
Yeah.
So where is it taking place? Very basic category. So we can find the exact location in the programs. So even though a lot of other places are mentioned in the data, more than 70% actually takes place within a public library. But still, there is actually more than 30 other locations, inside locations. And then there's also outside locations, and even elsewhere here, locations in remote cities or even other municipalities. Mm-hmm. And that's the case if you, for instance, look at an arranged trip to a book fair or something, then they can travel across the country or something. So so these are places from taking place within the public library to take place within another local institution or organization. That could be a school, a church, a museum, a community center, etc. It could be outside in the city or in the nature, close to the city, or it could be elsewhere, such as in another municipality or town. So these findings I know it's really basic, but these findings just indicate that it's not the exact location of a program. I argue that's defining for whether it's a program or not. Go on. Yes. So the duration, again, we could actually find sort of the average time of the program. It's about 1 and 2 hours. And the most interesting of this finding is actually that the duration differs so much according to the specific programs. So, for instance, the shortest one is 15 minutes, and that's called 15 minutes IT introduction or something. And it's really good. Then I get my iPad, working in 15 minutes. And then we find at the other end, a 9-hour excursion, actually, that was the across the country thing. So this is very much depending on what is the specific format of of the program. But another takeaway from this is that the programs are time-biased phenomena, and they are depending on this of actors being together in the same place at the same time. Very basic finding again, but adding to understanding maybe in a sort of conceptualized way what is a program. So how it's probably the most interesting category in format because it's this access, and then we added availability to this spectrum that I showed you before. So it's briefly the practical circumstances behind a program. Properties include price, ticket, registration, limitations, skills, or preparation needed. And dimensional locations are based, as I told you, from this free entrance, open for all things, to the more restrictive ones. Yes. So answering research question 1, we find that the format of public library programs announced in our data are characterized as physically based and time-based events, depending on the presence of people participating and the relation to a public library that provides access to the program and makes them available. So the relation to the library is not necessarily that it has to take place within a library, but it has some kind of access gained through the library, and that's mostly in announcing the programs. So even though we find programs entirely almost organized by others, they are still announced by the public library, and that makes them, I guess, a public library program. In addition, we find that there is an important link between the format of a specific program and the type of program in question. So as such, I find that format and content is sort of that type of program is based in between format and content of the program, if that makes sense. And I'm not really sure about this, but that's what I think right now. So the content is more tricky. It's actually just one question, like what is taking place, but what is content in this context? As I argued, I see context as this complex of parts, and going through the data, it becomes clear that there are some parts that are more dominant, and these parts can be characterized as topics, media, and materials. Again, often in close connection to the type of program in question. But I still want to sort of distinguish between type and content. So just trying to understand this in a bit more sort of analytical sense, we try to do the same thing about properties and dimensional locations with the topics. So the topics are, very broad. And I could just have the listing model going on and on and on about what is the topics. But the most sort of striking takeaway is that there's no topic that seems too big or too small to be the topic for a public library program. And in this topic continuum, we find everything from really highly personal issues like weight, relationships, illnesses. It could be physical and mental illnesses that people sort of share their own experiences with, or maybe it could be people suffering from a loss and actually sharing that experience. But it could also be community issues. There's been a lot of focus on these in between the personal and the societal community issues, which is also taking place within the libraries. And then the societal, the big issues of, for instance, like integration of climate change or public health. In the media, we find that the content of the program is still to a high degree depending on and relating to the library and its collections. And that's actually, if you look at the percentages, I would say more than half of the programs actually depend on this relationship to the library collection. That could be in sort of a media topic relationship, a literary sense, for instance, on music. But I just think it's very important to stress, since there's been this debate about from collections to connections, sort of neglecting the focus on the collections a little bit in the theoretical discussions. But of course, media as a continuum could also be seen from the analog to the digital, but not in the sense that it's only going that direction. It's still very much a continuum where both are present, and where a lot of different steps along the way are present. For instance, a good example of this is that a lot of Danish film screenings in the libraries, they draw on this publicly available streaming service made available through the libraries, where you could free of charge download films and see them, of course, from the library collection. So it's not like Netflix. It doesn't have all the fancy titles, but it has some really good classics and a lot of Danish films which cannot be found at Netflix, for instance. So it has so we have this service, and then the physically based program actually shows film from that streaming service. And in that sense, it's sort of this meta-determination of the collection, but through a program in some sense. And that's just what I mean about it can have this analog-digital interrelationship that's actually more fruitful than just this everything gets digitalized and nothing comes back. We also find a lot of programs actually focusing on board games, or actually like selling vinyl, because that's been a trendy thing again and stuff. So going back to the material, or to the physical media, then in the material we find the program centering on material as an end in itself, and programs using materials as sort of a means to, for instance, social interaction. An example of that is, for instance, if you have a knitting group, the yarn that you actually use, maybe that's actually a means to the social interaction. That's the sort of end in itself. Whereas you could also have programs sort of depending on, maybe I'm saying something that is sort of, I hope you get my point. I wrote knitting workshops, but they also depend on the media in some sense. And then we have programs where no materials are needed, for instance, conversation salons, but that's not going to do. So answering this question, we find that the content of the programs consists of a complex of topics, media, and materials covering both very personal and very highly societal issues, and providing access to both analog and digital media, as well as a range of physical materials around which to meet. Yeah, I don't know. That's very broad. Discussing function, which was sort of a more open question, we argue that public library programs constitute this link between the library collections and the connections they foster on both an individual and a societal level, which is why we stress between, the word between. The public library programs, if we take all of the research questions together, provide access to physically based social experiences and real-time events on a broad variety of topics, media, and materials, because cultural, educational, individual, and or societal roles and functions, placing them between the collections on which they build and the connections they foster. Yes, and the model, if you could say so, is still a work in progress, but the intention is to be able to actually address these three levels of abstraction with empirical data. It doesn't have to be from Facebook, it could be other kinds of empirical data, and to have some kind of vocabulary and some kind of strategy for doing so. So I guess, even though it's not like as nice as I would like it to be, this is an outcome. Yeah, and ultimately we just argue that these programs exist between the library collections and the connections they foster, and that they constitute in this a very intriguing analytical object for answering future questions about the role and function of public libraries, which I intend to do. So that's very nice. Oh, you can. Oh. I think it's done now. Thank you. I'm done. Thank you. I'm so sorry for my I think I took more time than I should.
No, that's fine. And I think that was great, Mia. And I think since Barb, thanks so much for staying with us.
Barb. Sorry.
And Barb, I think I'll give you first, Renak. So Barb, do you have any questions for Mia or comments?
No questions. Public disclosure, I actually am a new student and I start classes next month, so this is a welcome introduction to the program for me.
Oh no, I screwed up.
Yeah, no, not at all. And Mia, I apologize in advance for my pronunciation. Mange tak, det var meget interessant.
Hey,
det næsten allen den dansk som jeg kender. And for everybody else, I just thanked her and said it was very interesting, and that's about all the Danish I know.
I think it was perfect. I understood every word.
Great.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Welcome to the program.
Yeah.
Thank you.
On behalf of the other
Yeah.
Yeah. And Barb, if you have any questions, feel free to just use the email in the link here, because in 2 weeks I will not be at the UNCG anymore, and that's why I put this email, because that's my more permanent work email. So if you have any questions.
And so, maybe.
I perked up. Sorry, no. I'll interrupt one more time. I perked up when I saw your data visualizations because my current career is a statistician, so that's right up my alley. So if I know you have lots of resources, but if you ever want to bounce ideas off of somebody, look me up. I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you, Bob. Write me an email, then I have your contact. It would be great.
Will do.
Thanks.
Great, yeah.
Yeah, but okay, only the three of us. I don't know if you have any
questions.
But I would really love to take notes if somebody says something.
It's really interesting, because you don't really think like that in depth about programs with public libraries or really any cultural institution. And I know it's kind of interesting with like the Facer trend, because I just had to read a really extensive study of, unfortunately it's from like 2013, so it's not super helpful anymore, but about like social media outreach use in like archives. And it's kind of funny because 2009 was like the watershed year for social media use and outreach, and then after that, it's kind of like dwindled off. So it's interesting to see like you had almost a completely different trend.
Yeah, I think it just came a little later.
Yeah, and that's
So
what
Facebook was only being sort of recognized around 2009, and then it was more like a personal thing. So I think institutions jumped on board a little later, and as the data sort of reveals, it was almost impossible to find any public library system having had a Facebook page since before 2011.
Yeah, that's I think from the one I read, it said that like public institutions and like government institutions definitely came a lot later, but they were the first ones to like start blogging in comparison to other institutions.
Yeah. A lot of libraries also had this. They own their own website, and they have their own sort of blog posts, especially with programs. So, but it was just so difficult to compare all those different kinds of venues. So, the one venue made it more comparable, and I guess in that sense more suitable when you do like research in that.
It's interesting that you mentioned that libraries in Denmark are encouraged to use social media.
Especially were. I'm not sure what the policy is right now.
Yeah.
Because after spring 2018, there's been a lot of debate. I think the Cambridge Analytica and all that sparked a lot of debate. So now I think it's a little bit more controversial to be like almost making it mandatory to have a Facebook page. But I still think that a lot of librarians, because this is that's their main function, but they also have a lot of different hats on. So they don't have that much time to actually promote this, and I think use Facebook because it's so intuitive and so easy to get. They also have, I think it's also this feeling of getting it broadly out. Yeah. And then you could of course argue who actually uses it, and the demographic is smaller, I think, than you imagine when you post something on Facebook, because it's a certain age group, right?
I think it's interesting from my German perspective that, I know from when I worked in a library and when I did my bachelor's, I know a lot of people who worked in public libraries, and I know that they wanted to start Facebook pages, but because they're affiliated to the city or to the municipality, they were actually not allowed to do so, because then they would have to have like approval for every single post, like they had to go up and ask the major.
But Germany has really strict standards.
Yeah, and Facebook, I think this is it's interesting from a German perspective, because I think Germany has a lot of privacy concerns, like tendencies. Yeah. Or the EU more so than the US, I think, but it's interesting to hear about Denmark.
Yeah, but I think I'm really lucky that I got this data out before all of that happened. Because I'm actually not sure. I know that Facebook for developer thing that I used doesn't exist, or it's not available. And I also assume that more public libraries maybe, I don't know if they delete, but maybe they don't use it as much now. So the interesting thing was also that it was possible to go back to past events. And when you look at individual, for instance, websites where they had this event calendar or something, they would only, of course, have coming events. They would not have an archive of past events. So Facebook was, in that sense, a really good archive, and also why I was interested in this, like making doing web archiving on it, so that it became available also to future research. So I just have all these images, and of course, I don't know if anybody's interested, but it is a sort of image of what it looked like in these years in Danish public libraries.
Yeah, like the Wayback Machine.
So there should be some kind of discussion in the end of the thesis also, because in Denmark we are obligated to have our research data available 5 years after. So I need to sort of find out, of course, also if it's okay to have this. It's not going to be publicly available, but it's going to be available for researchers and somebody sort of, and then the university store it, I think, in a safe place. But that was something that actually got a lot of debate, because I think because of the Cambridge thing, so people were suddenly like, but what about the people who use their name? There's also names, of course, of different librarians sometimes. They say like, daughter arranged that or something. And then it's like, is that a problem to have that? But I never saw it as a sort of a controversial data before, because it was just like, it's there. I could just as easily just have copy-pasted it if I wanted to use 2 months doing it.
I have a question about the content. You said you had like 2000s or what?
Yeah, 2,793.
Like, I'm just curious, you said, like, how did you analyze the content again? Like, you had the descriptions, right?
Yeah, we have, mainly the coding analysis is mainly conducted in the descriptive fields of the Facebook events. That's the free field of text, so it's highly diverse. Some only maybe have one sentence like, it's going to be awesome, guys, and some have like a long novel.
Yeah.
And how did you use a sample to analyze?
Yeah, so it's been done in like different processes. I think what you saw in the first results article was like the initial sort of textual queries, visualizations, initial coding where you also I chose these samples to get in-depth insight, but I couldn't like code almost more than 2,500 like very specifically. So the smaller samples were sort of a way to see what can actually be found, and then doing some searches again on the broader sample. And I've both done this partly in vivo as this, and then actually also found that it was in some way sometimes easier to actually do it directly in Excel. So I sort of done both things.
Have you tried like text mining tools? Like volume?
No.
I've just recently heard about, like, I know a little bit about text mining, and there are these tools that let you analyze them. You have all these descriptions, which is like text basically.
Yeah.
There are these tools that let you analyze the text. That, you know, they look up how often certain words are used.
Yeah. But that's also what you could use, for instance, in Vivo. I just made these like word clouds, and of course used a lot of. That's also part of the first article, sort of the textual queries is a little bit boring to read maybe, but it was just to say that actually we tried to find out like, of course using all the most basic words as stop words, so they don't count, and then finding like what is the most basic words, and then we just found it was so diverse. Of course you get some sense of like, for instance, access is a really used word, and price and registration was because of course that's what they add in the end of the description. They say like sign up here or register here, or the price is 30 kroner or something. And also we should just say that, because then Noah encouraged me to sort of look further into the prices, and mostly what I would call symbolic prices. It's not very expensive, but actually it was maybe more of them there were some really interesting findings in that, and also which kind of program charges price and what the price is depending on the program. So we're going to do something about that, I think.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Maybe not before I leave, but then after. Yes.
And so, Mia, one question I have, I was just thinking, I can't remember if we've talked about this, but is the concept of passive programs, have you heard of that term before? So, maybe in the U.S., so in the U.S. sometimes librarians will refer to what they call passive programs, which means that they don't have a set time. It's kind of like a story walk, like if you set something up and people can kind of just go through it on their own time. Those are sometimes referred to as passive programs, or
it's a good word.
Or if you have like sometimes they'll even like they'll just call like they'll put up like they'll have like, I'm trying to think of some other good examples. Or sometimes like if you have like so one thing I've seen is that maybe they'll have two options, like choose what's your favorite. Are you DC or Marvel, and they'll have like a big jar of pennies, and they ask people to like put a penny in whatever, like you prefer DC or Marvel, and so they're not time dependent, but they're often, so you wouldn't see a Facebook event for it, but they're called passive programs.
That's the thing. They probably won't show in the Facebook. But I know what you mean, and also that's part of I think the history of programs, which will be explored in that other part. Mostly known in Denmark as this table with some creative material put up in the lobby or something, and then people can just, maybe there's a sign saying like make an Easter decoration,
Yeah.
and then people are encouraged to sort of do it. I guess that's a passive program.
Yeah.
I never heard that term before, so it's really good.
Okay.
But that's actually been something that I discussed with the librarians when I did the interviews, and I remember they said that was one of the most successful things because it took so little.
Yeah.
And then it was so, they really got good response. People were really like, oh, we just had such a wonderful, 2 hours just sitting there, maybe, I don't know, grandparents and grandkids, and just having a great afternoon without any sort of focus on using money or doing anything particular, but just making a bunny or something. Yeah. But it's maybe doesn't look that good in a strategy paper, maybe, to we set up a table.
Yeah.
So it was actually something that they discussed at that library, that they shouldn't do that much.
Oh, really?
They were told that they shouldn't do that. And I thought, so it's interesting what works and what's not looking good also. But it's because also of the focus of the user participation.
Yeah.
So I guess just the term passive program, or that it's sort of just there, it's not that engaging, or maybe it's just, I don't know. But it's definitely part of the history of it, and most programs has been like, I would also say that exhibitions are passive programs in some sense.
Yeah.
A lot of libraries, of course, have exhibitions, and actually the data from that monthly report, it dates back to the late 50s in Denmark also. And I can find in those reports actually the topic of these exhibitions. That's really fun. Yeah. Very passive in the sense that they're just there for like 2 weeks and you can just come and go and probably only see them if you come to the library anyway.
And I also just wanted to add, I really liked what you were saying about excursions. We hadn't talked about that, but that's interesting to know. I know that sometimes happens in the U.S. So the one in particular that's had the most excursions is San Francisco Public Library. Every summer since 2016, basically buses from the National Park Service will come around the different branches and pick people up and take them to the National Park on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge. And so it's quite, there's all these things that you don't think of, like when you think of programs, you think of just,
but that's why I found that these like questions, even though they're so basic, like where is it taking place, where actually, I thought, that probably the answer is just in the library, or maybe, in a museum or something. And then it was just this much broader variety of locations, and also actually that the programs can take places in like private homes as well.
Oh wow, private homes.
There's this concept, and that's one of the case libraries that I look at. They have this concept of takeaway program, so that you have to have this group of people. I think they all require at least 8 people or something, because otherwise the library cannot use like time to go there, and then they sort of come with what they need. And if it's, for instance, a conversation salon, which is I think one of the hot topics, then they bring like the conversation guide or the topic or whatever, and then they just come there. And sometimes in people's own home, and sometimes in a local school, but it's like to reach these faraway neighborhoods instead of having them coming to the library. So it's an option. And I think it's only been going on since 2017, so it's still a new option, but I think it was really interesting. Just broadening up like this private, public thing, like, but of course you don't find them here in the Facebook, like, go to Lily's house.
But no, I think that's great. I think it would be great as you're kind of writing up the article to just mention kind of here's what I learned from here's what I learned from kind of the interviews, and how the interviews kind of supplemented what you learned from the Facebook.
I think in the thesis there will be this, of course, reporting on the results in a broad sense, so both reporting on the results from the 3 different articles. I call the chapter an article because I don't know what. And then, of course, also discussing the sort of literature review and the historical background that I present, that I have worked on now, and then sort of wrapping up and trying to find like, also what I've learned across, because sometimes doing this study in the beginning of the process with like also a little bit frustrating because then you find new things and then you're like, oh, I want to add, but now it's already there. Yeah, so it's a way to sort of reflect on it and hopefully sort of also find something that's actually originated in the comparison also in the work with these different things instead of just saying like then A and then B and then C, but maybe like reflect on it more. And I'm still not sure how to, but I think that the interviews will foster in the discussion part of the thesis as well, because they provide some kind of, they have some really interesting perspectives.
Yeah.
The librarian's perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Using
That's
your time
been
here.
wonderful.
I know you have
presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Mia, and
You're
thank you, Barb and Neela, and
Oh yeah, hi Barb.
coming.